Young and Dumb. The title tells you everything. This took place when I was about 14 or 15 years old. I would stay over at my best friend's house constantly. She's an only child, and her mom would let us do anything, including leaving their place by ourselves at 1 or 2 in the morning. I'm surprised we're alive because we were very trusting. Like, get into a car with a group of teenage boys we just met, trusting. So one night, we're hanging out at a guy's house. The plan originally was that we were going to stay the night there, but his grandma ended up getting angry at him and told everyone to leave. It was around 1 a.m., and we had no other option than to walk back to her house. We decided on our walk to cut through a used car dealership, trying to save time. But their on-site security guy spotted us and told us we were trespassing. He asked us why we were out so late and where we were going. After hearing about what had happened, he said, "If a cop stops you, they won't believe that. You'll probably just get into trouble." We didn't have cell phones yet, so he asked if we'd like to use his phone to call someone. My friend's mom was going through a rough patch financially and didn't have a phone, so we couldn't call her. My mother would have killed us if we tried to call her, so we told him we didn't have anyone. So security dude offers to pay for us to stay in a motel for the night. This man was maybe 30 to 35 years old. Like I said, my friend and I were 15. But stupidly, we accepted this offer. So we both go to get into the backseat of his car, when he says, "One of you can sit up front." So my best friend promptly jumps in the back, leaving me to sit up front. We stopped by this man's bank and then headed to the nearest motel. The entire drive, he was telling us that he was a war vet and got injured on tour, saying that he would kill for a massage. He asked if either one of us were any good at massaging people. We as teenagers said, no, not really. We finally get to the motel. This dude parks and tells us to stay put in the car. But before he exits the vehicle, he takes his handgun that I didn't see before out of his hip holster and puts it in the glove box directly in front of me. He then locks it. Then he goes into the office to pay for the room. After returning to the car and handing over the keys, he ends up asking if he could come up with us and we could give him a massage, like a thank you of some sort. We immediately said no and booked it up the stairs, not turning back to see what this man was doing or what his face said. We deadbolted the door the second we were inside. We definitely didn't sleep that night. We were a little too creeped out from this experience. And as soon as the sun came up, we made our way out of there and walked the good hour and a half back to my friend's place. It's now 14 years later. I'm 28 and was just browsing Facebook. I saw a news article about an army vet being arrested for abducting and assaulting 2 teenage girls. It was the same bald-headed motherfucker security guy that picked me and my friend up that night. And it's a pretty unsettling feeling, thinking, what could have happened? Had we not had the sense to bolt up those stairs and lock ourselves inside the relative safety of that motel room? We may have been dumb, but I'm so very glad that we weren't dumb enough to let him in that room with us. Hey guys, if you're into the content that we create, we've got a Patreon where you can support the show and get early access to new episodes before everyone else. Just head on over to patreon.com/Malevolent Mischief or check the link in the description and join our community today. So this happened roughly 2 years ago. I worked at a fairly large motel, one that had 50 rooms between 3 floors. I was the only employee in the building after about 5 p.m. It should be noted, I'm a woman. The motel is on what's considered to be the nicer side of town, so a lot of companies will send their workers to us for room and board instead of the shadier motels on the opposite side of the city. Some of them were great guests. Others completely trashed everything. But that happens everywhere, I suppose. The layout of the building was pretty simple. You pull up by the front entrance, enter the foyer, and the front desk/lobby is right through a set of automatic doors. Right across the hall from the lobby was a staircase leading up to the second floor, and to the left was our elevators to the second and third floors. The first floor only has rooms on one side to allow for our pool, workout room, and a breakfast area/dining room. Lobby and the office rooms all being on the opposite side. The upper floors have rooms in a single row, with the third floor having the most rooms. Typically, the third floor, the highest, we kept only for business and long stays. Second floor was reserved for short stays or bigger parties. And the first floor we kept open for elders who have wheelchairs or walkers, or people who come in late at night for a one-night stay. I promise this is relevant to the story. Anyway, it was getting towards the last few hours of my shift. It was slow that night, aside from a few work groups I had checked in a few hours earlier. I noticed a raggedy, rusted, and beat-up black pickup truck pulling up into the brightly lit carpet, so I got my paperwork ready for check-in. A guy gets out of the truck, completely covered in dirt. I figured he just got off of work, as most guys come in covered in dirt or oil. I do specifically remember that he reeked, which isn't too out of the norm either. On the whole, I just chalked it up to him being in an oil field or construction worker. I got his identification. His name was Michael, and scanned it into the computer. He was rather reluctant to leave his vehicle information with me, but I explained if he didn't, his vehicle was at risk of being towed by morning. I thought he caved just because he was only going to be here for the night. Michael requested a second-floor room close to the lobby staircase so he could have easy access to the front doors for smoking. Not out of the norm either. After taking his payment, I set up his room keys. I explained parking, policies, and explained how he could get to his room, which was right up the staircase, and the door was on the opposite wall. He had a few bags with him, and he went upstairs. Almost immediately, though, he comes back down the stairs and accuses me of giving him broken room keys. I had to explain if he put them next to his phone or anywhere near a magnet, potentially in his wallet, the keys will deactivate. I did offer to take him upstairs and open the room for him to make sure the new set of keys worked. And they did. He walked into his room by himself, shut the door. So with that, I was on my way back down to the lobby. When I got back in the office, something odd caught my eye on the cameras. He hadn't left the building, but his car wasn't in the front anymore. He didn't mention anything about having another person with him. If there was, we're supposed to charge a $10 fee per extra person. The side doors don't open unless you have a room key, or are on the inside of the property. So I started to watch the cameras to make sure he wasn't trying to sneak people in. About 20 minutes pass, and I notice nothing happening except him coming down the stairs. I smile politely, and he heads outside. He stays outside for about 10 minutes, just standing in the carport. I can see it on camera. Now, while I thought that was a little weird, I just chalked it up to him having a smoke. I stopped paying attention after a while and started to file my paperwork that was due before my shift ended. Michael ran back into the lobby, cigarette still in his mouth. I told him there was no smoking in the building, and he'd have to take it back outside. This was something I highlighted while checking him in, so it wasn't a surprise. He just threw it on the ground and put it out with his shoe. He turned his attention towards the TV and ended up sitting in the lobby for an ungodly amount of time. He kept glancing towards the door, which made me uncomfortable. During this time, the minute friendly demeanor he had at check-in completely disappeared. He seemed paranoid and agitated now. He would whisper to himself, although I couldn't hear what. After about 30 minutes of him doing this, I instructed him to go back up to his room because I cannot have people in the lobby when I'm working on closing procedures. It was a lie, but ownership allows us to make up reasons if we're uncomfortable with a guest's presence. Michael asked me to take him up to his room because he's uncomfortable and scared. I explained that I'm unable to do that for safety reasons. What I could do was watch him go up the stairs on camera, and he could call down to the office on his room phone when he arrived there. I was just trying to be friendly and get him upstairs as quickly as I could. He goes upstairs, but immediately comes back down and informs me that he forgot where his room was, and I would need to show him. I told him at this point I couldn't leave the office or lobby, but I could explain to him where his room was because it was super simple. He was continuing his whispers. This time, it was about him losing his phone. I didn't pay any mind to it. After explaining to Michael where his room was, he went back upstairs, and I heard the door slam shut. It echoed throughout the second and first floors, and it gave me chills for some reason. Almost immediately again, he comes back down and starts yelling at me, accusing me of stealing his cell phone, that I was somehow planning on his demise, and I needed to find his phone. This was completely bogus, as I hadn't left the office since making sure his room key worked. He asked me for help, and I just wanted him to go away, so I slipped a screwdriver in my pocket, just in case, and I began rummaging through the lobby couches looking for his phone. I didn't find it, but I did find his credit card, which he also began accusing me of stealing. I stood my ground and said if he wasn't going to respect me in my place of work, I would call the police and request they escort him into his room or off the property. He got angrier, snatched his card from my hands, and went back outside. After about 20 more minutes, he comes back inside. He's calmer, but he asks if I would please go outside with him because there's something wrong with his car. After I absolutely refuse, he tells me that I need to go outside. That it's not fair he's the only person out there working on his car, and he just needs some fucking help. I had to explain I'm not allowed to accompany a guest outside of the building. That's when he starts repeating that I absolutely have to go outside with him. Now, I have anxiety, and I tend to let my mind roam over wide horizons, and this was a situation that triggered that. I was about to have a panic attack, so I called the owners and asked them what I should do. It was my first hospitality job, and although I have tons of freedom doing it, I still want to know how to properly handle these situations. The owner told me if I'm uncomfortable and suspect he's under the influence or a danger to myself or himself, I have full reign to call the police, have them ban him from the property. I asked if they could just keep an eye on the cameras they have access to at home, because he's acting weird. I locked all the lobby doors and made sure the side and fire exits were all properly secured and closed, so no one could sneak in. I did this while on the phone with my boss, because I was scared to leave the office by myself. After getting back into the office, I locked the door and I just braced for him to come back inside. My boss tells me to watch the cameras and keep my cell phone nearby, just in case I have to call for help. Meanwhile, I noticed on the cameras I couldn't see Michael anymore. I didn't know where he parked, but I damn sure wasn't going to go looking. What I did notice was that there was another vehicle driving through our parking lot. I called the hotel next door to ask if the car was on their cameras too, and I was informed it didn't belong to any of their current guests. Same situation with us. This just shot my anxiety up even higher. The car would drive around the back of the building, to the front, but avoid the carport, turn, and then do the same to the building next door. The parking lot was almost empty, so I know they weren't looking for a parking spot. The car keeps going, and I'm watching it on the camera so focused that I didn't notice when Michael came back inside. Once I see him in front of me, I tell Michael he either needs to go up to his room or vacate the premises. He just continues to yell at me, saying I needed to go outside with him. He won't move out from in front of the entrance. I imagine he was staying within view of whoever else he kept looking back at. Then randomly, he turns and sprints across the parking lot and out of the camera's view. As I look down, I realize I didn't see the car anymore after that. Since it was practically the end of my shift, I somehow managed to get everything done just in time for the next shift to arrive. I was so glad to see her, I almost cried. I explained to her what happened and that the owners wanted to keep the lobby doors locked. We put up signs explaining our doors were broken, and due to safety reasons, guests would have to call for entry or use the side entrances for their room. I also deactivated Michael's room keys and told the next shift girl not to let him back. If he shows up, to call the police because he's a security risk. I made sure she watched me get into my Uber ride after triple checking the vehicle and driver matched what my phone said. Since I was a regular customer of the driver, he asked why I was so riled up. I asked him to drive through the parking lot so I could see if Michael's truck or the other vehicle I saw driving across the parking lot were anywhere near the buildings. They weren't. I have no idea what happened to them. The next day, I had my boyfriend come stay the entire shift with me, just in case Michael returned, because I was told by my bosses he never came back to get his stuff. He wouldn't pick up our phone calls either. Nothing happened that night, or any other night. But a month later, Michael came in asking about his stuff and if he could get a room. I refused his room, and luckily other people were there with me in the lobby and in the office. I had our maintenance man go retrieve his items and explained he's no longer allowed on the property. If we saw him, the police would be called and he would be arrested for trespassing. Again, not exactly true, but we didn't want him coming back at all. I noticed Michael had a different vehicle this time. It was a newer model SUV, and it was maroon. It matched neither his beat-up black pickup truck or the dark-colored sedan I saw driving in circles. If there was anything that sat with me even after all this time, it was that he remembered my name. He addressed me by it when he walked up to the counter. And at first I thought, oh yeah, my name is part of my uniform. Until I realized I forgot to put on my name tag that day. After that, I refused to wear one in the hotel. Management let me create a fake name and wear that from that point on. It took me a while to feel safe in the building again when I was alone. I constantly had my boyfriend with me while I worked the evening shift. There's a chance Michael and the circling vehicle are unrelated, but my anxiety and the aura I got from Michael that night didn't feel good or right. It was April of 2008. I was 20 years old and living in Denver for a year-long work contract with a nonprofit in Boulder. My girlfriend, now wife, and my best friend Tim drove to Colorado from our home state to visit me for my 21st birthday. The nonprofit I was working for housed their workers in dorm rooms, and drinking was not allowed on site, nor were visitors allowed to stay overnight. So I booked what seemed like a nice hotel room in downtown Denver for the weekend, so we could have some place to hang and drink in honor of my 21st birthday. But when we arrived, we realized that this place precariously straddled the line between nice hotel and motel. It was big and in a central and safe-feeling part of the city, but all of the room entrances opened into a central courtyard that funneled to the open parking lot. So to say, it was possible to see each and every guest as they entered or exited their rooms from many different angles. But that's only something that came to mind much later. As young adults, we were more focused on the cutting loose and being free parts. My wife and Tim arrived Saturday morning and we all met up at the hotel. The day was fantastic. We drank all across the city most of the day. By about 1 a.m., we got back to our residence. The room was typical with 2 queen beds. Bed number 1 was close to a big window looking out across the property. If you looked hard, you could see mountains off in the distance, Bed number 2 was pushed against the wall with a door that opened to the bathroom. You couldn't see the door or entryway to our room unless you were at the foot of bed number 1. We kept the party going, drank more, and chatted in the room until about 4 a.m. My wife was laying at the head of bed number 2 flipping through the TV. Tim and I were seated at the foot of bed number 1, staring out the window as we talked. As we spoke, I heard some movement and the sound of a door opening. Without looking away from the window, I assumed it was my wife getting up to use the bathroom. A few minutes passed by, and I thought I heard movement again, so I finally turned around to look. I saw my wife still lounging in bed number 2, as she had been. "Did you get up to go to the bathroom a few minutes ago?" I asked her. "No," she replied. "I thought I heard a door," I said back to her, with her just looking confused back at me. "Yeah, I thought I heard that too," Tim said, breaking his own gaze from the window. It was then I started to run cold and sobered up pretty quickly. Very softly I heard Tim say, "I think there's someone in our room." I lurched forward from the foot of the bed to look into the pitch black entryway. I could barely make it out, and I wanted to believe I wasn't seeing it, but there was a man, dressed all in black, with a baseball cap pressed into the 90-degree corner of the entryway where the room door and wall met. Absolute silence fell on the room, and it felt like hours passed by as I started to panic in my mind, like no other way I have in my entire life. We all knew. We knew we weren't alone, and hadn't been for a while. And now he knew we had spotted him. Eventually, Tim got the courage to meekly speak in the direction of the entryway and said, "Hey man, is there something we can help you out with?" Another period of silence that felt like an eternity went by. The man slumped off the edge of the wall a little, into the light, and made eye contact with Tim and I. We all just stared at each other. Then, eventually he spoke up and said, "Is this room 1709? "No man, it's not," Tim said, stroking his beard nervously. The man stared at us for a while longer, raising his eyebrows and shaking his head, before he turned and silently left. We then erupted into a million curse words and paced around the room. I called the front desk. They told me that this man was drunk and they found him in the stairwell but directed him back to the right room. Minutes later, Tim called down to the front desk and they told him that the man was not a guest, although he was apprehended in the stairwell before being taken into police custody. Then a while later, my wife called down to the front desk just to follow up. They told her that he had disappeared, and they had no idea who he was or what he was doing. They told her there wasn't even a room 1709 on the property. So we all got 3 very different versions of the story. All this time later, and we still have no idea what that was all about. How that man managed to get a key card to our room. We were sure the door was closed, so it's not as simple to think that it was just a crime of opportunity. This was easily the most terrifying moment of my life. And now, I always use the latch when in hotel rooms. We got the stay refunded, and about $200 in credit for food from the hotel. I don't know if we should have done something more than just accept their offer. Maybe we should have gone to the police. But we were young and dumb, and all the partying from that day certainly didn't help in decision making. We finished out our weekend stay and went back to our daily lives. But even now, almost 17 years later, my wife and I will have the odd conversation about this. The time that we hosted an uninvited visitor in our motel room for my 21st.